Thank you so much. I think that was a great panel discussion, and I think the most important takeaway for me was the change in mindset. I think the entrepreneur in the accountant's role has to emerge, but it has to be a change in mindset. Are you even the numbers, the monthly MIS that financial accountants produce, the financial statements that you produce, can also be used with an entrepreneurial mindset. So I think we're warming up well. Some very important sessions ahead. As accountants, I think it's always important that we talk about the new and upcoming things that are happening in the International Federations of Accountants. We are very pleased to be joined, who is also with us in Karachi, Dr. Wayne Shroff, who is a board member and chair of the Audit Committee, International Federation of Accountants. Dr. Shroff is a certified German auditor and a senior partner at KPMG for the last many years. He's been with the KPMG for 34 years and has held several senior leadership roles within KPMG at the national, European and global levels, including chair of KPMG's Global Regulatory Group and chair of the International Financial Reporting Panel. He was managing partner for KPMG's Berlin office from 1997 to 2001 and a member of the management board of KPMG Germany during 1998 to October 2013. We are very pleased to have Dr. Shroff with us. Can we please request you to come on stage for your presentation? Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Shroff.
President Chamdia, Vice Presidents and the leadership of ICAP, distinguished guests, it's a great pleasure for me to be here with you today in Lahore. I've been to Karachi and it is actually a great pleasure to be here for me to bring on behalf of the IFAC leadership, of our President, Ms. Rachel Grimes, our warmest regards to you, the Institute of Chartered Accountants in Pakistan, and we do recognize and we do appreciate the contribution that is brought to the international organization, to IFAC, by you, by your members in person and of course through the organization. I was asked to talk about the future of international standard setting for the accountancy profession. And if you look into your flyers here, it reads a little bit different, maybe a little bit more aggressive. It says, resetting the standard setting model, enhancing public trust, or a recipe for chaos. And I leave it to you to answer that question after my presentation. If we talk about the future of standard setting for the professional accountants, we do need to look back a little bit of how the current model that we see today, that we have in place today, has evolved over the last couple of years. As many of you know, IFAC is or has been established in 1977. You remember, many of you might remember those days, and we've seen on a chart earlier when globalization of businesses, globalization started. It was arguably the 70s, maybe in the late 60s, when foreign direct investment became more popular because of deregulation. So foreign direct investment, I think from that it was obvious that people needed to understand and trust into financial statements, financial reporting cross-border. And at that time, there was kind of a misunderstanding. There were no uniform, no harmonized standards, neither for accounting, nor for auditing, nor for ethics of the profession globally. So there was obviously a need for international standards. And you're aware of the International Financial Reporting Standards of today. The IASC was established in 1973 to exactly develop that what we have today. In 1997, IFAC was established at the occasion of the 11th World Congress of Accountants in Munich, in Germany, in November that year. And so we had the occasion to celebrate 40 years of the International Federation of Accountants in Brussels in November last year. So what was the purpose for IFAC? The purpose for IFAC was to establish standards, international standards on auditing, to establish international standards for education and also ethics standards for accountants. This was initiative solely by the professional organizations around the globe. That were 63 from 51 countries at the beginning, and now I think we proudly can be proud of the growth rate. We are 175 members from 135 countries. This is kind of a success, I think. The idea was to develop high-quality standards that can be understood and applied globally so that users across the borders, across the globe, can rely on the work of professional accountants, and in particular with this direct investment cross-border. The idea was to have principles-based instead of rules that would cover the whole financial reporting supply chain. So that would not only be relevant for auditors, that would be also addressed to accountants in business and in public practice, the PAIBs, as you are representing here as CFO. In particular, with a view to the ethics, the integrity and the ethics of the profession around the globe. Of course, in 2000, there were the early 2000s, there were major accounting scandals. One was Enron, but it was not only Enron. But those raised concern about the quality of the standards and the performance of not only auditors, but the accountancy profession in accordance with these standards. So you're all aware of external oversight bodies were established at that time, at the beginning of that period, and the end of self-regulation for the accountancy profession in many of the jurisdictions around the globe. The IASC got restructured. It was a trust established to hold the activities of the accounting standard setting, and IFAC was urged to agree to reforms. IFAC was urged by the monitoring group, and the monitoring group is, that's the daemon for the profession, maybe. The monitoring group consists of IOSCO, the International Organization of Stock Market Supervisors, the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, the International Insurance Supervisors, the Financial Stability Board, the World Bank, the European Commission, and finally the International Forum of Independent Audit Regulators. And they got together with a view to strengthen the standard setting process. They urged IFAC to these reforms to ensure that the profession is responsive to the public interest. Finally, the Public Interest Oversight Board was established in 2005. And then the next crisis happened, the financial crisis from 2008. You all remember when Lehman Brothers collapsed. That changed the world again. So what happened then? I'm not going to through all the details here, but just to remind you that the profession, the international organization represented by IFAC, reacted to that. Upon request from the European Commission, for example, and the monitoring group, the international auditing standards have been revised through the so-called Clarity Project. And also the standards on auditors' reporting have been revised in order to provide more transparency about what the auditor is doing. And the issue also was what can the audit profession deliver upon the request on providing assurance on going concern. The going concern issue was one of those major issues of that time, and the second one definitely was corruption and bribery. And the Ethics Board started a project that was also finalized in 2015 with the project named NOCLAR, Non-Compliance with Laws and Regulations. And that is not only relevant for the audit profession, but it's also relevant for the accountants in business, because it's changed the code of ethics in this way. So the PIOB, the Public Interest Oversight Body that oversees everything what IFAC is doing, was not really happy in the end. And in 2015, I think the monitoring group issued a letter to IFAC and asked for more reforms to address a perceived undue influence of the profession on the standard setting. And IFAC reacted and tried to negotiate with the monitoring group, but that didn't work out finally. So the PIOB launched a public consultation, and finally, and that's what I'm going to talk about in a few moments, the monitoring group launched its own public consultation on strengthening the governance and oversight of the audit-related standard setting board in the public interest. So before we go to that, let me just summarize the model as it is applied right now. The model, and I would like to draw your attention to the solid red line. That is what the PIOB, the Public Interest Oversight Board, actually oversees. And that is almost everything within IFAC. That is, of course, the heart, the standard setting boards on auditing, on education, and on ethics. The lower three blue boxes here. And of course oversees the Compliance Advisory Panel. And the PIOB oversees even the IFAC board meetings. So there is a lot of public oversight in that. And it is also important to know that the reforms of 2003 led to a membership restriction for professionals, for practitioners in these standard setting boards, the 3 standard setting boards, up to 9 of 18, so 50%. So it is, for the time being, it is impossible for the active practitioners to have a majority in this standard setting process. That is also remarkable because the funding is almost 100% provided through IFAC and through the Forum of Firms, which is an organization within IFAC, the Forum of Firms, where the large international audit firms provide about $12 million into the budget of IFAC every year. The total cost for standard setting is about $25 million per year. So, as I said, the monitoring group launched a consultation, and I quote from that consultation paper what their concerns are. The concerns are that there might be an adverse effect on stakeholder confidence in the standards as a result of a perception of undue influence by the profession. And that results from, first, IFAC manages the nomination process. That's right. The IFAC manages the nomination process and also directly funds, provides support and audit and staffing for the standard setting boards. So all the technical support that is provided by IFAC, in their view, may raise a concern. Audit firms and professional accountancy organizations provide the majority of board members and their technical advisors. And that is definitely, as I've explained to you just a minute ago, that is a false statement. That is not possible that the majority of votes is from the active professionals in the standard setting boards. Although other members of the standard setting board may have had a education in accountancy, still members of the accountancy profession, but they are not active in auditing or in accountancy profession. The second reason, because of that, of undue influence, there is a risk that standards are not developed fully in the public interest. And third, relevance and timeliness of standards is criticized by the monitoring group, that SSBs, the standard setting boards, do not respond in a timely way to calls for revision from regulatory community. It is important for you to understand that the success of the global international standards that have been developed under the roof of IFAC is also due to the buy-in of the global accountancy profession, and that is a result of huge consultation that is going on through the process of developing new standards. So in particular IFAC 700s and those have been developed with the public consultation taking place at the same time when the PCAOB, the US standard setter and oversight body, launched a project on auditor reporting, and the European Commission launched a regulation on that. And IFAC was the first to complete that project in discussion, of course, with the other stakeholders. So what are the topics of the monitoring group in detail, what they want to change? First of all, just a brief comment on that. They want to have the public interest as the overarching principle. That is fine. Everybody can subscribe to that. That public interest should be the overarching principle. But nobody knows exactly what public interest really means when it comes to operational, let's say, assessment of standards, whether they are in the public interest or not. So that needs to be developed, and the monitoring group has asked the Public Interest Oversight Board to do that. So that will take place in the next couple of months. And then the second point I'd like to highlight here is that the standard setting boards as we have them today, from the monitoring group's perspective, should be merged into one. The only thing they are interested in is auditing, so they want to have the standard setting for international audit standards as well as ethics for auditors merged into one board. And the board membership should be reduced to 12. The work should be focusing more on strategic issues rather than on technical drafting, which is not too bad. Multi-stakeholder representation on the standard setting board, meaning that the auditors would have maybe 4 out of 12 seats. But the rest should be regulators and users, for example. And the appointment to the standard setting board should be made through the PIOB, the Public Interest Oversight Board. And last but not least, the standard setting boards should be remunerated. The board members should be remunerated, and that is a reaction to calls from public members that they cannot afford working so hard because they are not remunerated for that. Many of the practitioners in the standard setting boards are partners of audit firms, so they are remunerated through the firms, and those public members lack this remuneration. The next thing that I would like to draw your attention to is the change in the nominating process. The PIOB, that is the idea, should take over that 100%. And the role would also be to collect the funds from the firms and to allocate to the work. The last point I'd like to address is the SSB staff and the funding issue. The monitoring group is concerned that the staff that is, let's say, drafting the standards actually is employed by IFAC. And they see it as a conflict of interest, at least as a potential conflict of interest that should be resolved by the PIOB or the standard setting board itself become a legal entity that can employ the staff. And of course, they would need more people to employ because they want to speed up the standard setting process. And that brings me to my last point here on this slide, that is about funding. It is easy to wish for such a larger organization, remuneration of standard setting board members if you have enough funds. But the regulators said, the monitoring group said from the beginning, we cannot spend additional funding into that process. So their idea is actually to collect the money from the audit firms through a contractual levy. So in the end, the funding would be 100% through the audit firms again. Summarizing this model that the monitoring group has proposed to us is this way. The monitoring group takes over control over the standard setting process, over the standard setting boards through the PIOB, the Public Interest Oversight Board. And there is no role for IFAC, there is no role for professional organizations worldwide. There is no IFAC nominee on the PIOB anymore in the future, and the audit firms should provide the funding to this new standard setting board. We'll see how that works. IFAC is supportive of some of those proposals, to be clear about that. IFAC supports the definition of public interest, of course. IFAC is also fine with the multi-stakeholder composition of the standard setting board, even if the membership of active practitioners is reduced from 50% to 1/3 of the membership. IFAC is also in favor of reviewing the roles and defining the roles of the PIOB, but IFAC, of course, is not in favor of limiting membership of the PIOB to just regulators. IFAC is also in favor of an independent chair of the nominating committee, that's fine, and also in favor of consideration of ways to make standard setting more effective and more efficient and even more timely. IFAC is, on the other hand, concerned about a few things that characterize the public consultation that the monitoring group has issued. There are significant deficiencies of the monitoring group consultation paper, including these false statements, as I told you, about the current model and the lack, and there is definitely a lack of independence, a lack of evidence for these perceived problem with independence. There is a debatable assumption that is used in that paper that only regulators can act in the public interest, and that public interest may require even standards to be adopted, even if not all of the stakeholders agree to that. The monitoring group is moving away from this shared public-private collaborative model of standard setting into a more, let's say, regulators-driven regulatory model where regulators can exercise influence. And of course, the character of standards will be changed. That's what they've indicated, from principles to rules. More prescriptive standards that can be easily monitored and enforced, and of course any failure can be sanctions. That's the interest of the regulators, and IFAC does not support this. There is also a risk that some jurisdictions may revert back to national standard setting, and that is, I think, the achievement over the last 40 years that we have is a set of global standards that is applied or adopted in more than 120 jurisdictions around the globe. And I think that is a great success for IFAC. On the other hand, that is at risk if this model, as proposed by the monitoring group, will be introduced. And of course, standard setting by regulators might not be able to keep pace with the disruptive technology changes that we see today, and will of course be more costly as ever before. And IFAC strictly rejects the idea that the two boards should be merged. The ethics and the auditing standards board should be merged. I think that is important for you to understand that IFAC is of the view that one board for ethics for all accountants, maybe auditors or maybe public professional accountants in business, is in the public interest. Nobody wants to be governed by a sort of second-class set of standards. And IFAC does not support that the PIOB is acting as the nomination committee for the standard setting. And the funding through the contractual levy through audit firms is definitely not acceptable, as it would heighten even the perception of undue influence by the audit profession. And of course, also the comment letter sent in from IFAC made it pretty clear, from ICAP, from your institute, made it pretty clear that there should be the whole picture developed, and there should not be a process in stages in introducing these reforms. Let me draw final conclusions for you. I think you as CFOs are a key element in the financial reporting supply chain, and you are addressed and affected by this reform, and therefore I think you should have a voice in the debate. And it is good to know that you addressed the issue of one single ethics board or one single board for audit and ethics. And of course, it is in the public interest that we have an ethics standards board that is responsible for auditors as well as for public accountants or professional accountants in business. The monitoring group proposals are an excellent example of how regulators react to crisis. So we have seen over the 20 years, or maybe even longer, from the 70s to the 90s, a deliberation, and we have seen growth. That was the result of that. Now we have seen some crisis. The regulator pendulum is swinging back to regulation and maybe to over-regulation, and definitely from principles-based to rules-based prescriptive standards. And regulators taking over control of standard setting, while at the same time they are responsible for enforcing the standards. And I think that might create a conflict here, at least from a perspective of a continental European constitution. Self-regulation definitely is over, is no longer accepted, that is clear, and we have to deal with that. On the other hand, let me just finish with my last two comments. IFRS, the financial reporting standards, require from you, from the accountant, more judgment than ever. Regulators, on the other side, tend to eliminate professional judgment from the audit, and they tend to strictly enforce compliance with rules. And that might have some, I would say, negative consequences. There may be a shift in mindset in auditors from exercising professional judgment to just comply with rules. And if you combine that with more and more automated audit process, the audit profession will become less relevant. That's my concern. And definitely, and we see that today, in audit there is less interest by young talent. And there's also the rest, as I said earlier, I can only repeat that there is nationalism. Some jurisdictions might revert back to national standards, and nationalism, as we've heard earlier and we see every day, might create new barriers to foreign direct investment and international trade and to capital markets. And please reflect on what you've heard by Mr. Shirazi earlier. To leave you with IFAC's commitment, I can promise that IFAC will maintain a dialogue with the monitoring group on behalf of its member bodies, and that's you. IFAC is representing almost 3 million people, 3 million professional accountants worldwide, and more than 50% are being professional accountants in business like you. So IFAC will continue promoting quality and credibility along the entire financial reporting supply chain, and that is in the public interest. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you so much, and I leave it to you to answer the question whether the proposals by the monitoring group are a recipe for chaos or will finally lead to enhanced trust in public reporting by companies. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for a detailed update on the changes that are happening. I'm sure it will take a while for various parts of the world to fully absorb them. But thank you for coming down to Karachi and to Lahore. Can I please request Mr. Naeem Akhtar Sheikh, past President of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Pakistan, to please come up on stage and present a souvenir and memento to Dr. Shah. Thank you. Dr. Sharaf, thank you so much for traveling to Karachi and to Lahore and for the deep insight into the changes in the IFAC. So there is a traditional gift as well for Dr. Shah. So you will always remember that you came to Pakistan, invited by the ICAP. Special moment in your history. Thank you.